Just after first light on the 3rd of September 1944, a column of German trucks rolled down a Belgian road. The drivers thought they were headed into open country. They had come more than 200 miles from Normandy. They had lived through Falaise, where a whole army was ground apart in a bag it could not escape. They thought they had earned one clear road home. The road ran northeast toward a town called Nivelles. Past it lay the German border. Reach it and they were safe. The road was not open. Dug in at the crossings and the rail cuts around a mining town called Mons sat an American armoured division. It did not know the Germans were coming. The Germans did not know it was there. Both sides were about to crash into each other by accident. Over the next 6 days, a trap closed on 70,000 German soldiers. Nobody ordered it shut. It shut because one message never arrived. This is the Mons pocket. Before it was over, 4 German generals were in American hands. More than 25,000 of their men were prisoners. The force that had held Normandy stopped being a fighting body. But hold one question while we walk through it. The men who planned the retreat into this trap mostly walked out free. The generals who were caught never commanded the breakout at all. Why that happened is the whole point. We come back to it. Start with who was on those roads. By the last week of August, the German armies in France were not armies anymore. The 7th Army and the 5th Panzer Army had been broken in Normandy, then broken again at Falaise. What streamed east now was the wreckage. 10 divisions were still named on the maps. On the ground, each one was a few thousand exhausted men, mixed in with cooks and clerks and drivers, riding whatever still held fuel. Most of the tanks were gone. When it was over, the Americans counted only about 40 German armoured vehicles in the whole ruin. The word Panzer promises steel. What crawled toward Mons was exhausted, men on foot and in trucks, with a handful of tanks left to guard them. 2 weeks had wrecked them. After the American breakout from Normandy in late July, the front stopped being a siege and became a foot race. American columns ran 40 and 50 miles in a day, faster than their own supply trucks could follow. Paris was freed in late August. British tanks were rolling into Brussels and reaching for the port at Antwerp. The German front in the west was not retreating in order. It was coming apart. The men marching toward Mons were the tail of that collapse. They were exhausted, low on fuel, and afraid of what was chasing them. Everyone moved faster than the maps expected. The side beaten first was losing the race. No higher command told them where to go. 3 German generals met and decided for themselves. Erich Straub, who led the 74th Corps, took charge of the whole mass. Under him came 2 more commands. Walter Kruger brought the 58th Panzer Corps. Wilhelm Bittrich brought the 2nd SS Panzer Corps, the same SS armour that would fight at Arnhem in a matter of weeks. Together they called themselves Army Task Group Straub. It was a formal name for 70,000 men trying to get home before the door shut. Straub had picked up Allied radio traffic. He knew what was coming for him. His plan was simple. Drive northeast, cross 40-odd miles of open ground through a gap he believed was still there, and reach Nivelles before the Americans could close it. The Americans had no idea he was there. On the American side stood the 7th Corps of the 1st Army under Major General Lawton Collins. Collins had 3 commands. Maurice Rose led the 3rd Armoured. Clarence Hubner led the 1st Infantry, the big red one. Louis Craig led the 9th. A new order reached Collins. "Stop driving northeast," it said. "Turn north toward Avesnes and Maubeuge and Mons." Collins did not know it, but that order aimed his tanks straight across the road Straub was counting on. Now the accident. 1st Army Headquarters sent Collins a 2nd order. Fuel was short across the whole front, and every gallon was counted. "Halt short of Mons," it said. "Hold there. Save the gasoline." If it had reached him, his tanks would have stopped miles from the town. The German column would have rolled through the gap exactly as Straub drew it. The order never got through. The radios failed. Collins never saw it. So the 3rd Armoured kept rolling north all through the night. At first light it drove into Mons and did not stop. It threw tanks and roadblocks across every road that ran east. The men in those German trucks were driving home. They drove into an armoured division instead. Martin Blumenson, the official American historian, wrote it in flat, careful words. He said the meeting at Mons was, from the tactical point of view, a surprise for both sides. Neither army, he wrote, had been aware of the approach of the other, and both stumbled into an unforeseen meeting that resulted in a short, impromptu battle. That is a careful man being precise. On the ground, it meant thousands of Germans came around, bends in the road, in the dark and the grey light, and found American tanks already parked on the shoulder, waiting. The fighting opened in the dark and ran through the next day. Nothing about it looked like Normandy. It was a string of ambushes along roads. A tank unit of the 3rd Armoured caught a German column strung out for more than a mile and destroyed it where it sat. Trucks and half-tracks and guns burned nose to tail, no room to turn, nowhere to run. These Germans were not braced for a fight. They were braced for a long drive. Many never got their weapons off the trucks. Panicked men dove into the ditches with nothing in their hands. Here is what turns a road march into a disaster. Troops on the move cannot fight. Their guns are stowed. Their line is strung out for miles instead of facing a front. Their eyes are on the truck ahead, not the tree line. A dug-in force only has to hold the crossroads and wait. Hit the head of a column and the trucks behind it cannot pass. So they stop. Then they are targets too. Panic ripples backward faster than any order can run. That happened again and again on the roads around Mons. The Germans were not caught in one battle. They were caught in a dozen. Each one a column slamming into a block it never saw. At the one moment it could do nothing but halt and be taken. When the day came up full, the American fighters joined in. squadrons of P-47. Thunderbolts found the packed roads around a village called Gergenes Chaussee and worked them from the air. A road jammed bumper to bumper is the easiest target in war. The columns could not scatter. The fields on either side were soft and the ditches were full. The thunderbolts came down the line of them again and again. It cost the Americans almost nothing. It cost the German column most of its transport. The ring took shape. The 3rd Armoured held the roads between Mons and Avesnes. The big red one pushed in from the southeast. The 9th came up from the south around Charleroi. To the west, the 19th Corps sealed the roads toward Tournai. To the south, the 5th Corps shut the door behind them. British units moved to block the roads north. 70,000 German soldiers were now inside a shrinking ring, and the men holding it had rolled into place by mistake and now knew exactly what they had caught. On paper, the trapped men belonged to some of the German army's harder outfits. Paratroopers, the 6th Parachute Division among them, with a name for stubborn defence. Luftwaffe field divisions, ground crews handed rifles. Regular infantry worn down to a fraction of its strength. 10 division staffs, each riding herd on a few thousand survivors. The name on the map said one thing. The men on the road were something the name no longer fit. A stubborn defender is only stubborn dug in and facing the right way. Strung along a road at dawn, he is just a line of trucks. The Germans knew it. And they did what tracked men do. Some fought to break out. Some, doomed and out of fuel, began to surrender in numbers that stunned the Americans taking them in. That day, the 3rd Armoured alone took about 9,000 prisoners. The big red one took about 7,500. These are not estimates of the dead. These are counted men, disarmed, marched to the rear in columns that took hours to pass. The big red one had help. Belgian resistance fighters from the mining towns of this coalfield, the Borinage, came out with whatever guns they had. They ambushed German units on the back roads, cut them off, and handed them over. This was their country coming back, road by road. It was payback for 4 years of occupation, and they took part in taking it. The people of the Borinage had a name for that week in their coalfield. They called it the Little Stalingrad. It is a big name for a battle of days, not months, and it does not really fit in scale. But these people watched a German army come apart in their streets and their slag heaps and their pit yards, and they reached for the biggest word they had. In their memory, it was the week the occupier stopped being a garrison and became a column of prisoners walking the other way. Not everyone surrendered. Motorized units, desperate and still fueled, drove straight at the American roadblocks, and some broke through. The eastern edge of the ring was the weak seam. The Americans had reached it in a rush, not in strength, and held it thin. Through that thin seam, over the days of the fight, a large part of the German force clawed its way out in a desperate rush and kept moving toward Germany. Say it plainly. The Mons pocket was not a sealed bag like Falaise. Of the 70,000 men inside, about half got away. It still caught more men than any single action on the Western Front that year, but Falaise. and it still let half its catch escape. A door shut by accident has gaps in it. But look at who did not get out. 4 German generals were taken in the pocket. 3 can be named. Rudiger von Heyking, who commanded the 6th Parachute Division, went into the cage with his men. Karl Worley was taken. Hubertus von Auloch was taken. These were the men who ran the fighting inside the ring. American officers sat them down and questioned them. And the generals talked. They gave up detail on the German border defences, the old belt of concrete the Germans were falling back to, the Siegfried Line. Men who 3 weeks before had commanded thousands were now a source on the next battle. That intelligence was worth more than the prisoners. The Americans were about to hit the German border, and every planner feared the same thing. Could the old fortified line along it, the bunkers and dragon's teeth built before the war, still be manned and held? The generals taken at Mons had just come from that ground. They knew what was there and what was not, which stretches held troops and which were empty shells. A captured commander who talks can save the men behind him weeks of blind fighting. These men talked. The battle that swept them off the field handed their knowledge to the enemy in the same stroke. Von Heyking's war ended in a field near Mons. His captivity did not. The British held him first, at a country house near London called Trent Park, a quiet place wired with hidden microphones, where captured German generals were nudged into talking to each other. Later they handed him to the Soviet Union. He was not released until 1955. The parachute general caught on a Belgian road did not see Germany again for 11 years. Now set that against the other 3 names. Straube, Kruger, Bittrich. The 3 men who had formed Army Task Group Straub, who drew the plan, who commanded all 70,000. All 3, with their headquarters staffs, got out before the ring closed. They drove east ahead of their own men, crossed to the far side of the gap, and escaped to fight again. Bittrich would run his fanatical SS men at Arnhem within weeks. The generals who designed the retreat into the pocket lived through it. The generals left inside with the troops did not. This is the grim shape of a broken army. The command escapes and the command's men are captured. The head gets out and the body is taken. It is the exact reverse of how an army is supposed to work. It is one of the clearest signs that a force has stopped being an army and become a crowd with generals attached. Count what they left in the coalfield. About 40 armoured vehicles, about 100 half-tracks, 120 artillery pieces, 100 anti-tank and anti-aircraft guns, nearly 2,000 trucks and cars, about 3,500 German soldiers killed in the 6 days, more than 25,000 taken prisoner. Put it together, and roughly 28,000 men were removed from the war in under a week. Now set beside that what it cost the men who did the removing. The 3rd Armoured lost 57 killed. The Big Red One lost 32 killed and 93 wounded. Across the whole corps, fewer than 100 men died. Fewer than 100 dead to break a force of 70,000 and strip it of most of its guns and trucks. That is not a battle in the ordinary sense, two sides trading blood for ground. That is what a beaten army looks like when it is caught in the open. Its back to a road it cannot use by an enemy it never knew was there. The Germans could not fight. They could only surrender or run. Half of them ran. The fight ended on the evening of the 5th of September. The last big group went in near a town called Wasmes, where the 26th Infantry, a regiment of the Big Red One, took about 3,000 more prisoners in one haul. Then it went quiet in the Borinage. The roads lay full of abandoned steel and long files of men walking west with empty hands. What did it buy? It tore a gap almost 50 miles wide in the German front. For a few days, the road into Germany stood open, and American commanders let themselves believe the war might end in weeks. The German commander in the west, Field Marshal Walter Model, looked at the wreckage and decided northern France and Belgium could not be held at all. He ordered what was left to fall back to the border, to the old Siegfried Line, and build a wall there. Mons was one of the blows that forced his hand. A commander does not give up two countries in an afternoon unless the armies holding them have come apart in his grip. The hope did not last. Fuel ran short. The advance slowed. Given a few days, the Germans pulled a new line together, and within a week there was a solid front again from the North Sea to Switzerland. The war did not end in 1944, but the force that had defended Normandy did not reach that new line whole. A large part of it stayed in the Belgian coalfield, in the ground or in the cages, and the outfits famous in the summer were names on paper by the autumn. Go back to the road at first light and the trucks rolling toward what the drivers thought was open country. Everything that fell on those men flowed from one failure, and it was not even theirs. An American general never got the order to stop. Had that one message arrived, his tanks would have halted miles short. The gap would have stayed open. Army Task Group Straub would have driven through it and vanished east, the way its three corps commanders did. Instead, the message was lost. The tanks kept rolling. 70,000 men drove into a division that was never supposed to be there. The generals who planned the escape made it. The generals who stayed with the troops were taken. The whole thing turned on a slip of paper that never reached the one man who could have let the Germans go. Some armies are destroyed by a better plan. This one was destroyed by an accident, and the men who paid were the ones who followed orders all the way to the end.